ready to generate our first action, and we are on video 10. Keep in mind, I'll have a bunch of snippets for you. If you click on this link, it will have the commands that you need to run in the command line. The first action that we're creating in this video, all that will be within the snippets link. And what we're going to be creating an action for is our customer support page. On the right here, click on this link. And what actions are really good for is expressing unique events that happen throughout your application. Like in this case, when the user fills out this form and hits send, we'll fire off an action for that, letting us know that the form was submitted. And that's what we'll be working on in this video. Let's check out a real live example online. If you go back to the home page, go back down to video 10, click on the documentation. I just want to show you some examples of what we're going to be doing in this video. And here at this link, if you go down to the middle of the page, what we're going to be doing is creating an action file. And we'll do this from within the command line like we did with our store. We'll generate that from within the command line. And we'll be setting up our action something like this. And then we'll dispatch our action from our customer support TS file, something very similar to this. So that's basically what we'll be doing in this video. Let's generate our action file. If we go back down to NGRX schematics that we were checking out in the last video, and in the last video, we generated a store from the command line. But now we're going to generate an action file from the command line. Just copy this, and we'll only use a couple flags that they got going on down here. Like for example, //API. We're going to set this to true. This will generate us some basic methods, some action methods for us. And I'll show you that pretty soon. Also, we'll skip the test, so we'll use this. So it won't generate as a spec file. Let's generate our action file. Inside the terminal, paste. And then we'll describe the name of our new action file and also the location. So I'm thinking of putting our new action file within our global store. Anything pertaining to our pages. In this case, we're working with the customer support component. Anything that pertains to the pages folder, we'll put it within our global store. And then anything that pertains to our individual modules, we'll create like child states or features within each of these individual folders. So we'll generate this within our global store folder, so store. And then I'm going to create a new folder called actions. This is where we'll pull our global actions, and I'll call this customer support. And then also add in the dry run. So this won't actually execute anything, and this is really nice. So if you make any mistakes, you don't have to go in and delete all your, your files or anything like that. Go ahead and run that. It's going to ask us a few questions like, do you want to generate a couple action files? Sure. Do you want to use the create function? Yes. And then this is what it will look like if it executes. And I'm going to go ahead and skip the test, and they give us a flag for that. And also, you could skip this question here. You don't have to get asked that every time, and you could use a flag for that as well. Let's go ahead and use those two flags. Use the API first, and we'll set that to true, and then skip test, and that'll be equal to true as well. Go ahead and run that, and yes again, and then now it's going to generate us one file, and it's going to be in its own folder called actions. That's perfect. Let's go ahead and run that. Remove the dry run. All right, so we should have a actions folder now with our brand new customer support actions file. So now it was generated for us a few actions already, 3 actions. And that was because we used that API flag and we set that to true. And it all automatically pulled in the create action and the props from NGRX store for us. To create a brand new action, it's pretty straightforward. You use the create action method. And you'll notice a pattern within NGRX, like there's a few methods. It's like create reducer, create effect, create action. There's a lot of them like that. And in this case, we're using the create action. And to use this, you could pass in 2 parameters to it. The first parameter is a string. And this basically describes who is calling this action and what was the event that was triggered. And like, for example, we're using the customer support page, and this is for when the user submits the form. So like, for example, we would have customer support component here within the brackets. Then here would be the event. So like submitting form or sending form, something like that. That's the action that's being or the event that's being fired off. And then the second parameter is optional, and that is a payload like this. So you don't have to include that like they're doing here. And then in our case, we're going to use a payload. So we'll be using this props and we'll be passing in the form data as the payload. So let's create our own action. I'll just go ahead and add that to the bottom right here. And I'll paste it in. And keep in mind, you'll be able to find this snippet online. If you go to the home page and click on the snippets button, you could just copy and paste all of this. So here I'm being descriptive as possible. Customer support component, that's who's going to be dispatching this action. And you want to really avoid being generic like this. I made that mistake in the past. And when you're generic like this and you just keep the same name, when you're debugging, it's very hard to find who's calling these actions. When you have like 25 different actions being fired off, and you look at this doesn't really tell you who's calling this action. In this case, when you read this, you know it's the customer support component that fired this off. And then what is being fired off? In this case, we're sending the customer support message. That was the event. And then we're passing in the form data, and this is the customer message interface. Let's go ahead and pull that in. And let's take a peek at that. I'll click on it and hit F12. We're passing in the name, email, and message. So this is just a standard interface. Close this down. And now we just created our first action. So how do we actually use this action? How do we dispatch this action? Back in the documentation, we created our action file. We created our first action. Now we're ready to use it. And they show you right here how to use it. So you pull in your store inside of the constructor. You use the dispatch method that comes with the store. Pass in your action name. In our case, it's called sending customer support message. And then the optional payload. And in this case, we're going to be sending in the form data. So let's set this up. If we go back to our project, and then if you're in Visual Studio Code, you could hit Control P and search for it that way. And you're looking for the customer support component, this one right here. Or you could find it within the pages, customer support, and then the TS file. You want to open that up. So the first thing we need to do is bring in our store. So inside the constructor, I added on to the end here. Make it private store. And then it's going to be our store, and we're going to bring that in from NGRX store. And the type that you want to add in is called the app state. And that comes from our index file. If we go back down to our store, and we generated this in the last video, and the index, and where I'm getting that name from is right here, the app state. So whatever you have here in your index file, you want to make sure that is matching up with this right here. So we brought in our store. Now, where do we want to dispatch it from? Well, right here, we call this method whenever the user submits the form. We call this method, we pass in the form data, and then we send it off to the service for it to handle it. Well, I'm just going to comment this out for now. We'll be getting rid of it later. And then right now, we'll dispatch the action right here. So let's call the store. Then inside the store, there should be a method called dispatch. And then like it says in the documentation, we need to pass in the name of the action. And that is this, sending customer support message. Copy that, it's pretty long. And for now, I'll do it this way. There's different ways we could do this. Like we can pull it in different ways, but for now, I'll just paste it in here. And then we want to pass in a payload like this within brackets. Bring this in first. And we want to bring that in from actions, customer support actions. And then what's nice about this is we have telesense. If you hit Control Space, all your telesense, so all the payload that you would need to pass in here would just show up. And it's called data, and that's what we named it right here within the action, right here, the payload. So that's what's really nice is it just shows up for you and you know what you need to pass in. And then we'll pass in the form value. Same that we're passing in right here. That's all the form information. And that's pretty much it for dispatching the action. So let's test this out. So let's make sure we save everything. Save this, format it for me. And then go back here and let's go ahead and clean this up. Get rid of this and save this file. Restart the application. I have it on this window. Then npm run dev. The customer support page, open up the dev tools and then click on Redux. And now when we click on this button here, our action should show up on the left side. I don't have any form validation for this form. I kept it real simple. So you could just throw in anything like the name. And then when you hit send, it should dispatch our action. Click on send. And then there is our first action. And this is really nice when you're descriptive like this, because you can figure out what's going on just from a glance instead of going into the code and trying to debug everything. For example, on the left side here, we know who is calling or who is dispatching this action. Then on the right side, we know what is the event that's being triggered. In this case, we're sending the customer support message. And then on the right here, if you click on the action, I always get these mixed up, the state and the action. Like when I'm debugging a action, for example, I'll have it on the state and I'm looking here and nothing's happening. I'm like, what's going on? Well, just make sure you have the right button clicked. So click on action, and here you can see the payload that's being passed in. So we called it data, and the interface that we're using, name, email, message, and this is the message or the name we passed in. And then whenever you want to see the changes or the updates it made to your store, you could click on state. And then usually it'll show up here. But in this case, we didn't create any reducers. That's what reducers are for, is for updating our state. And then the difference button, you can see the difference from the last state to the current state. So how do we actually update the state of our store? Well, we use a reducer for that, and let's do that in the next video.